Dobro jutro svim učesnicima, nadam se da se čujemo i da je sve u redu. Pošto je 9 sati, ne bi dužili, ne bi dalje čekali, već imamo 70 učesnika, koji vjerovatno će i određeni broj učesnika da nam se pridruži u nastavku. Veliko mi je zadovoljstvo da otvorim drugi od ukupno 7 webinara koji se u sklopu projekta izrade strategije okoliša, odnosno životne sredine za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, skraćeno nazvanim ESAP 2030+, i organizovanog od strane Štokholmskog instituta za okoliš i lokalnog partnera Enova Cener 21, a pod pokroviteljstvom švedske ambasade. Kako vam je poznato, u toku je proces izrade strategije zaštite okoliša, za koji trenutno obrađuje 7 tematskih oblasti, od kojih je jedna otpad. Za nas je to vrlo izazovan proces za sve učesnike koji učestvuju u izradi. Znate da imamo i 7 radnih grupa koje broje veliki broj učesnika koji kroz jedan novi do sada način strateškog planiranja participatornim pristupom, znači učešćem velikog broja interesnih strana, predstavlja određeni iskorak kada je u pitanju strateško planiranje u Bosni i Hercegovini. Izazov je tim veći jer po prvi put Bosna i Hercegovina će dobiti strategiju koja treba da nas približi evropskom putu kada je u pitanju zaštita okoliša. U tom svjetlu organizovali smo i ovaj današnji webinar koji ima za cilj da predstavi iskustva Estonije u procesima usklađivanja i provedbe zakonodavstva Evropske unije o otpadu i izrade odgovarajućih strategija koje su bile vezane za taj put. Moderatori današnjeg skupa ćemo biti kolega Draženko Bijelić i ja. Moje ime je Irem Silajđić i nas dvoje smo zapravo vodeći stručnjaci koji vode proces izrade strategije za oblast upravljanja otpadom. Na današnjem webinaru čast mi je ugostiti naše izlagače iz Estonije, gospodina Hari Muru i Peter Eka, koji će biti današnji predavači na seminaru. Prije nego što ih predstavim i dam im riječ, zamolit ću kolegu Draženka da vrlo kratko da pregled trenutnog stanja u oblasti otpada i s njim povezanih izazova u Bosni i Hercegovini, koji su rezultat rada radne grupe za upravljanje otpadom u sklopu izrade ove strategije, do kojih smo došli kroz zajedničku diskusiju u dvije radne grupe koje smo do sada organizovali u sklopu izrade strategije. Draženko, izvoli.
Hvala, Irem. Na početku ja bih da pozdravim prije svega naše predavače kao i ostale učesnike u današnjem webinaru. Kao što vidim, pored članova radnih grupa ima i dosta participanata koji nisu članovi radnih grupa. Na početku, prije predavanja naših predavača, napomenut ću da je radna grupa za otpad održala dvije radionice i ja ću ukratko za naše predavače i za ostale učesnike kratko prezentovati trenutnu situaciju što se tiče upravljanja otpadom u Bosni i Hercegovini. Znači, u 2019. godini na osnovu statističkih podataka u Bosni i Hercegovini je generisano oko 1,2 miliona tona otpada. Od toga je sakupljeno oko 77%, a najveći procenat tog sakupljenog komunalnog otpada potiče iz domaćinstava, zatim oko 18% je iz proizvodnih djelatnosti i 4% iz javnih službi. Što se tiče sastava u sakupljenog otpada, organska frakcija je pretežno dominantna i ona ide i do 50% u zavisnosti od opština do opština, odnosno gradova, a ambalažni otpad je negdje do 40%. Već sam spomenuo, znači 77% je stanovništva obuhvaćeno uslugom prikupljanja otpada, a što se tiče prerade otpada, dominantni tretmani otpada u Bosni i Hercegovini je i dalje deponovanje. Postoji 7 regionalnih sanitarnih deponija koje su izgrađene kroz projekat Svjetske banke upravljanja čvrstim otpadom u Bosni i Hercegovini i postoje još 4 međuopštinske, ali koje ne zadovoljavaju sve ove kriterijume da budu sanitarne. One imaju neke prelazne dozvole za rad, plan prilagođavanja da bi postale sanitarni, a i oko 76 neuređenih opštinskih deponija. Od toga je oko 36 u Republici Srpskoj, 39 u Federaciji Bosne i Hercegovine i 1 je u Brčkom distriktu. Također, veliki je broj i ilegalnih deponija, znači podaci iz 2018. godine govore da se u BiH nalazi oko 2270 lokacija ilegalnih deponija, od čega je u Republici Srpskoj oko 270. U BiH je instalirano oko 5 linija za sortiranje otpada, od čega linija u Doboju ne radi i tu se vrši sortiranje uglavnom ambalažnog otpada. Nedostaju nam postrojenja za obradu i zbrinjavanje posebnih kategorija otpada, posebno mislim na otpadni mulj, medicinski otpad, opasni otpad. U Bosni i Hercegovini postoji i operateri u Federaciji Bosne i Hercegovine, operateri za ambalažni i elektronski otpad, a u Republici Srpskoj jedan operater za ambalažni otpad. Što se tiče finansiranja usluga, znači uglavnom se komunalna ova preduzeća svoje usluge naplaćuju sakupljanjem naknada od domaćinstava i jednim dijelom iz lokalnih samouprava i cijena je uglavnom još na kvadratnom metru stambene površine i kreće se negdje od 10 pfeniga po kvadratnom metru, a godišnja negdje ponderisana cijena je u Federaciji oko 88 maraka po toni ili 79 maraka po domaćinstvu, a u Republici Srpskoj je 113 maraka. Izvinjam se, u Brčkom je oko 80 maraka, a u Federaciji Bosne i Hercegovine oko 102 marke. Također, što se tiče ovih strateških dokumenata, u Republici Srpskoj postoji usvojena strategija upravljanja otpadom do 2026. godine i na osnovu te strategije urađen je i plan upravljanja otpadom do 2029. godine. U Brčkom distriktu također postoji strategija upravljanja otpadom u okviru strategije zaštite životne sredine i važi do 2026. godine, a strategija za upravljanje otpadom u Federaciji je istekla. Već je Irena vas upoznala na kom principu teče izrada ovog ESAP-a i mi smo ova druga grupa, odnosno radna grupa za otpad i postoje radne grupe za 4 nivoa vlasti, znači na nivou Bosne i Hercegovine, zatim grupa na nivou Federacije i grupe na nivou Republike Srpske i Brčkog distrikta. Do sad su održana 2 sastanka ovih radnih grupa i radne grupe su definisale ključne izazove za svaki nivo vlasti i ja ću sada kratko samo proći kroz ove ključne izazove. Znači, radna grupa za nivo Bosne i Hercegovine je konstatovala da izazovi su nepostojanje efikasnog mehanizma planiranja, koordinacije i monitoringa aktivnosti u sektoru upravljanja otpadom i druga izazov je nedovoljno efikasan sistem implementacije međunarodnih obaveza u oblasti upravljanja otpadom, kreći tu na Bazelsku konvenciju dijelom. Što se tiče radnih grupa za Republiku Srpsku i Federaciju, one su dosta slične. Pa evo, ovdje su neki 11 definisano tih na nivou Federacije Bosne i Hercegovine, pa počev od nedovoljno razvijenog zakonskog okvira, nedostatak politika koje podržavaju prevenciju otpada, njegovu ponovnu upotrebu i politike ka cirkularnoj ekonomiji upravljanja otpadom, zatim nedovoljno efikasan rad institucija u sektoru, sistem generisanja, praćenja i izvještavanja, zatim nedostatak financijskih instrumenata za adekvatno upravljanje, nedovoljna infrastruktura za prikupljanje i odlaganje otpada, zatim također infrastruktura za njegov tretman, nedovoljno razvijena svijest javnosti o pravilnom upravljanju, prikupljanju i odlaganju otpada, nedovoljno razrađen sistem produžene odgovornosti za posebne kategorije otpada, već sam spomenuo znači, da u federaciji samo postoji za 2 kategorije, neriješeno pitanje posebnih kategorija otpadna ulja, akumulatori, baterije i neriješeno pitanje kontaminiranih lokaliteta. Što se tiče Republike Srpske, ovi su izazovi dosta toga slični, međutim ovdje samo na primjer razlika je neprovođenje mjera za prevenciju otpada. Ja bih tu istakao, jer planom su definisane mjere, međutim te se mjere ne provode. Zatim nedovoljno nerazvijen sistem upravljanja industrijskim i opasnim otpadom i neriješeno pitanje lokacija većeg zagađenja životne sredine, takozvani crne tačke. Brčko distrikt, isto radna grupa je definisala 7 ključnih izazova i ovdje možda bi samo izdvojio, znači za Brčko je nepostojanje sistema, izazov nepostojanje sistema produžene odgovornosti proizvođača i neuređena lokalna deponija komunalnog otpada koja predstavlja stvarno veliki problem za Brčko, ali i tu smo se upoznali sa nekim pomacima i uskoro bi komunalno preduzeće iz Brčkog trebalo da svoj otpad vozi u Zvornik, tako da će ova deponija, u toku je proces izrade projekta sanacije i trebalo bi doći do njenog zatvaranja. Ja bih za toliko samo i zaželio nam svima ugodan rad i pozivam ove sve učesnike današnjeg webinara koji nisu članovi radnih grupa da se slobodno prijavi bilo koju grupu, znači možete u sve 4, možete neku koja vas interesuje, znači prijaviti se možete na jedan od ovih e-mailova info@esap.ba ili slanjem maila Irem ili meni na ove navedene adrese. Toliko.
Hvala Draženko i hvala što si manje više bio u zadanom vremenu. Potrudit ćemo se da pratimo dnevni red i da ne iskačemo iz okvira. Sada bih pozvala gospodina Harija Muru da sa svojom prvom prezentacijom nas upozna o izazovima i potrebama za razvojem u svjetlu okvira Evropske unije u oblasti upravljanja otpadom na primjeru Estonije. Možda bih samo kratko da predstavim gospodina Harija, on je direktor za program Štokholmskog instituta za okoliš u Talinu. Inače je doktor nauka iz oblasti okolišne tehnologije koji je stekao na Tehnološkom univerzitetu u Talinu, a zvanje magistra nauka u oblasti upravljanja okolišem i okolišnih politika na univerzitetu u Lundu. Gospodin Hari, u njegovo polje interesovanja je uglavnom cirkularna ekonomija i zaštita okoliša u svjetlu EU politika i ima više od 20 godina iskustva u koordinaciji domaćih i međunarodnih projekata o održivom upravljanju otpadom i održivoj potrošnji i proizvodnji. Gospodin Hari zajedno sa gospodinom Peterom, kojeg ćete upoznati malo kasnije, je učestvovao u cijelom procesu aproksimacije Estonije politikama Evropske unije u trenutku kada je Estonija pristupala Evropskoj uniji i u tom smislu njegova iskustva i znanje koje će nam prenijeti kroz današnje prezentacije su nam vrlo bitne u smislu otvaranja nekih novih pogleda i mogućnosti za Bosnu i Hercegovinu kada je u pitanju strateško planiranje, jer i u uvodu sam rekla za nas je ovaj proces vrlo bitan u ovom trenutku kada i Evropska unija ima posebne zahtjeve za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, te u tom smislu se radujemo da čujemo današnje prezentacije. Gospodin Hari, izvolite.
Thank you, Irem, and good morning also from my side. It's really a pleasure to share some of the experiences from Estonian point of view. I think there are quite many interesting issues and lessons learned when it comes to the waste management policy, European Union waste management policy implementation, because Estonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have quite many similarities. So basically, if we if you look back on our history, or let's say the political history, then this is also very similar. There are many other features which actually make our countries quite similar. And when I was hearing Tarasenko's presentation about the challenges and issues which are up there in your country and different regions, then I also recognize that there are quite many similarities. And I think it would be maybe interesting to share some of our experiences when it comes to the approximation and the implementation of EU waste legislation. Before I jump into the waste management, and I will maybe still share some of the facts related to Estonia. I hope that you see my slides also in parallel.
Not yet. I don't see them, but now the screen sharing has started, so you can start.
Good. So I try to do in parallel presentation in English, but I hope that you can follow it in your own language in a way. But we will have some time at the end of the workshop, so that you have definitely a chance to ask clarification questions. Unfortunately, the time which is today given for us for this short overview is very short, and me and Peter, we really like to talk. So I hope that we don't run into the problem related to the time. So please, Irem, keep an eye so that we don't get stuck into certain issues. Yeah. But again, when it comes to Estonia, as I already said, there are many similarities, and Estonia is definitely one of the smallest European Union member states, especially when it comes to the population. But as I already said, there are certain similarities, especially earlier times. Although being a small country, we used to have many municipalities. So the country was split into small municipalities, and this is definitely an issue which I would say also could cause certain, let's say, challenges or even problems when it comes to the development of waste management system. And in this small country, we used to have more than 200 small municipalities. Today we have split it into almost half, or let's say there are approximately 80 municipalities, but still we clearly see a lack of cooperation, and this is one of the challenges. And we will come to that once again, and Peter will cover a little bit better this area. But when it comes to the economic structure, then Estonia has shifted away from more industrial activities. So as you can see, services are now sharing or taking the biggest share of the economic structure. And Estonia is quite well known from its IT developments. But still, when it comes to industry, then we have a specific industry. We have this industry is mainly related to large-scale resource utilization, and this is also a specific problem which has caused many challenges, especially when it comes to the waste management. Estonia joined the European Union in 2004, and we are today also part of the Eurozone. So next, please. Maybe just few facts about the waste generation and waste management. And if you look on those figures, you might think that Estonia is really a giant of waste, basically generating more than 20 million tons of waste, which is basically 17 tons per person. It sounds really crazy. So I think the European average is something like 3 tons of waste per person. And here I'm not talking about municipal waste, but total waste generation. So Estonia exceeds this figure many times. And you might think that something is wrong with this country, but this is mainly because of our specific industry, which is related to oil shale and oil shale processing. And Peter will a little bit give you an overview of the challenge related to this type of huge amounts of mineral waste which is generated in this industry sector. And this is maybe also something which is good to know for you, because when you do the accession process, there's always an issue related to all waste, not only municipal waste. And then in Estonia, the municipal waste share is only below, it's approximately 3% of total waste generation. You might think, why we have to talk about municipal waste if there's so many other waste streams which have to be taken care of. But when it comes to European Union waste policy and targets, then this is mainly based on municipal waste. So the municipal waste is definitely an issue where there is also need to focus more. And here we also can share some of the experiences, because as you see, officially the recycling rate of municipal waste is only something close to 30%. And some of you maybe know that European Union member states, they had to achieve 50% of recycling of municipal waste by 2020. And here you can see Estonia is definitely below of that. And maybe some of you also know that at the moment there are 4 official ways to calculate the share of waste recycling. This is still valid until 2025. And Estonia, we utilized the possibility to change the calculation method. And official figures are now below 50, but this is just a temporary game with figures. So this will be over by 2025. But the real recycling rate is somewhere around 30%. At the same time, landfilling, I would say this is one of the success cases, and this is definitely an issue which we would like to share with you. How to really move away from landfilling society to more recycling society or waste management system. So, and the issue here is incineration. So thanks to the incineration, we very quickly, approximately 10 years ago, cut down our municipal waste landfilling rate. Okay, maybe this is enough about the background of Estonia, because we will come to that anyway in next presentations. But maybe it's also worth to look into the recent developments on European Union level, because this is something which will definitely will be something which will influence both Estonian developments concerning waste management, but this is also something you also maybe have to take into account, because this train is going very fast, and in a way nowadays or today European waste policy is basically integrated into the much wider scope of circular economy. And if you take the next slide, then as you might know, approximately 1 year ago, European Commission adopted the new circular economy action plan, which now, as I already said, will have much wider focus. It's not anymore traditional waste management alone, but it is much more now about the design of products, also really bringing in and trying to change our consumption habits. It is also about focus on specific areas, and maybe it's worth to mention those areas also, because these are the priority areas where there will be a specific strategies and actions developed. Just to name them, first of all, of course, plastic. This is one of the most, I would say, challenging areas. I will come back to that also soon, but also electronics and ICT, batteries and vehicles. This is because of the very fast development in the mobility sector, because there will be lots of new batteries available because of the electricity-based mobility system development. Then specific areas related to, again, our consumption habits, such as textiles, food, and then, of course, construction and building materials. And and this sector in itself, because 50% of the resources that we consume every day, they are related mainly on buildings and construction activities. So these are the specific priority areas where there will be specific strategies and actions developed in coming years, and there will be lots of new requirements and also targets related to those specific areas. Can you jump into the next slide, please? And this is just to illustrate that the overall view in this circular economy new approach is not only end of life or basically waste management. As you can see, the whole life cycle of products will be covered. And there are many other kind of regulations or areas of regulations which also now will be integrated under the circular economy. And maybe it's worth to mention use of materials, and then of course the REACH, or let's say European Union chemicals policy, is one of those driving legal areas where there is a lots of new developments going on. Of course, design and production. This is first of all related to specific requirements on specific products. At the moment, the main focus has been on products which consume electricity or energy, but in the future there will be also very specific requirements concerning the material use and the circularity. And what is a specific focus area where there is definitely less attention put earlier, this is related to consumption and use. There will be most probably also several new pieces of legislation, but also such issues like eco-labels, public green or procurement, and these are the areas which should also contribute into the prevention of waste generation. So as you can see, tomorrow's waste-related, or let's say resource use and waste-related European Union regulatory framework will be much wider than today's waste management-related directives and regulations. So from that point of view, you can see that this is not only a task for let's say environmental-related authorities, but it should be much wider. Okay, let's jump to the next slide. And very briefly, most of you already know that still, although the focus will be wider under the circular economy framework, we still see that most of the targets established by different European Union waste-related directives are still related to recycling. So there's a heavy, or let's say a significant increase of recycling, which is required. And just to name some of them, there is this gradual progress to 65% recycling when it comes to waste, municipal waste by 2035. This is, I would say, one of the biggest challenges for some of the member states. And I would say also for Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think this recycling related, how to improve the recycling of municipal waste, this is definitely one of the challenges. And then the other issue, which is related to less landfilling. So cutting down the landfilling, and by 2035, the landfilling should be below 10% in each member state. And I would say this is also, from the Bosnia and Herzegovina point of view, one of the most urgent or most like a kind of priority area where there is a need to put more attention and attention. And of course, in parallel with packaging recycling, increasing targets for recycling of packaging, also challenging, especially when it comes to the plastic as a material. As you see, the biggest jump in concerning the recycling requirements or targets is related to plastic packaging. This is a big challenge, really a challenge also here in Estonia, really how to ensure higher, or let's say more recycling when it comes to this very difficult material or waste stream, which is the plastics. Also some other areas, or let's say packaging materials, I would like to mention maybe glass as such. In Estonia, this is definitely a challenge because it's mainly related to consumption in households and more in general sales packaging. It's very difficult to to collect glass in a way in bulk, and also it's quite costly to collect it. And there will be also new developments when it comes to the calculation on how to calculate and really report to the European Commission when it comes to recycling targets. This is something where there is a real mess at the moment in the European Union. Different countries have their own kind of calculation reporting systems, and we see very big differences among those EU member states. And this is definitely an issue. How really to ensure that all member states follow the same rules, and the figures which are reported by the member states, they should be comparable and really should be transparent. And this is something which is, I would say, one of the challenges, and definitely a challenge for Bosnia and Herzegovina, because it's already now important to develop a really smart system to collect this information and also to monitor the system. So it's I would say, one of the challenges for your country also. Let's jump to the next slide.
I mentioned that we are out of time, so please try to wrap up.
Yeah, very briefly, just to indicate some of the issues which are very important. And one of those, as I said, it's related to the plastics. A specific plastic strategy under the Circular Economy Action Plan. You can see there's lots of challenging requirements, especially when it comes to single-use plastic. There's many types of plastic-related products which will be banned. And when it comes to plastic bottles, you see the specific targets which have to be achieved by the end of this decade. We can see that this high level of recycling of plastic bottles can be achieved via only, I would say, the deposit system, which we also would like to a little bit discuss with you and show you the examples of Estonia. I would say one of the biggest success cases, the deposit system for beverage packaging. And if we quickly jump on, then I'm not going to go in details when it comes to new next targets and issues which are on the table, but just to mention some of them. Bio-waste collection, which will be mandatory by 2023. It's important because if you would like to achieve the recycling target of the municipal waste, then it's not enough to collect packaging waste. Packaging waste is only 1/3 of the municipal waste stream. The other 1/3 is formed by the bio-waste. So really, you should already start to think, how to collect the bio-waste, food waste, how to ensure the recycling of this waste stream. And then, of course, to indicate the textile waste, which is also not so big stream in the municipal waste. I would say it is somewhere around 5%, but still you can see that there will be requirements to organize a separate collection of this type of waste streams also. And now when we jump on, this is just to indicate the current situation, but I think you can later on also yourself see what is the situation and where Bosnia and Herzegovina would fit in this figure. But as you can see, and then if you take another slide, you can see that the main aim is to increase recycling, and then at the same time, of course, prevention of waste generation. The prevention of waste generation is one of the biggest challenges, because if you are in the curve of consuming more, and hopefully also both Estonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina will enjoy the economic growth, then it's very, very difficult to cut down the amounts of waste. And if you jump another slide, just to show you again the picture here, as you can see, it's the big variety when it comes to different member states concerning the recycling, landfilling. So it's really big difference here, and that's why this also a little bit illustrates the different approaches and strategies on how these different countries have tried to solve or reach the EU waste policy targets. And maybe another, and which is I hope the final slide. Again, here I'm not going to spend too much time. I will leave the floor for Peter to cover some of those issues, but just to indicate very important first step, which I think Estonia did correctly. This is the relatively high landfill tax, which really allowed us to leave the landfilling as such and really to go forward to more recovery and recycling. And the key, I would say, measure here is landfill tax, which I think it's a crucial issue to discuss also in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As you also heard earlier, very challenging recycling targets for especially plastic and plastic bottles. You can't do it without a deposit system. It's more or less clear. So you should really think on how to introduce the deposit system for beverage packaging. Again, how to organize this system. This is something that we will discuss today. What is the role of municipalities, private sector, and so on. In Estonia, we have failed in a way. We have not really involved municipalities. They are not very strong and motivated to be part of the municipal waste management system. And as we can see, almost 10 years, there is no real success when it comes to recycling. So this type of lessons, I think we would like to share with you. And I have already consumed more time. I know that Peter will do the same, I'm pretty sure. So Irem, hopefully you will somehow, solve the problem, but I will stop here my presentation and give a floor to Peter.
Thank you very much. We'll try to fit in. It's really interesting and I hope that our attendees are enjoying. Hvala velika, jako interesantna predavanje. Nadam se da svi učesnici uživaju i dobivaju vrlo korisne informacije, posebno s aspekta našeg budućeg strateškog planiranja. Htjela bih napomenuti da na kraju imamo i panel diskusiju sa pitanjima i odgovorima, obzirom da je ovo vrsta Zooma koja podržava webinarsku varijantu. Pitanja možete postavljati u Q&A ili u chat kućicu koji se nalazi u donjem meniju. Njih možete odmah početi postavljati pitanja pa ćemo na kraju sumirati i davati odgovore. A sada bih zamolila gospodina Petera Ika da prezentira iskustvo Estonije u kontekstu usklađivanja sa zakonodavstvom Europske unije u otpadu, gdje će nam kratko pojasniti kako se taj proces pregovora razvijao i ukratko predstaviti glavne izazove koje je Estonija prošla u ovom procesu. Kratko samo da vas upoznam, gospodin Peter radi u oblasti upravljanja otpadom više od 30 godina i to u javnom sektoru i učestvovao je praktično u kompletnom procesu prilagođavanja Estonije evropskim tokovima. Danas radi kao konsultant u privatnoj konsultantskoj firmi Earth Care. Tako da njegovo iskustvo kao generalnog direktora odjela za otpad pri Ministarstvu okoliša Estonije će sigurno biti od velikog interesa za naše administrativno osoblje i ministarstva da čujemo posebno ova naredna prezentacija. Peter, izvolite.
Dobro jutro from my side, and could you please switch to the slides, or I will share this one. Yeah, good. And let's start. And I tried to use the time given to cover the process, how the Estonia joined the EU and what was the preparatory work for it. And after also, that means that the part being there already, the part of implementation, so to say. So let's start. Next slide. So there is just dates when and how Estonia came closer to the European Union, more or less after gaining or regaining independence 91. 4 years later already Estonia applied for the membership. 97 European Commission decided to start negotiations, and actually they were started 98, and the full package of the negotiations, not only the environmental issues, all EU. That lasted 4 years and 8 months, so it's a pretty long period anyway. And yeah, well, it ended that we joined to the EU 2004 with the 9 other Eastern European countries. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is a title just. And now just looking back how it all developed, that there was already first waste law in 1992. That was even, let's say that nobody didn't even perhaps dream very much yet about this European Union. It was so far. And on this very time, the economy collapsed and the living standard was very low, and average salary was something like 50 euro per person. And everybody remembers this time, and me personally too. It was difficult times anyway. But even then, actually, a certain foundation to the waste management was laid. And with this law, for example, the waste permit system and waste reporting system and such things were put in place. And already in the mid-90s, economy started to develop and things got better. And of course, this European Union wasn't really just a dream, but something already on the screen visible when the negotiations started. And this very time, more or less, we had yet permitted already, I will emphasize here, permitted dumping sites up to 250 around. And there is just one picture that very often such countryside dumping sites, there was no control. And obviously, if there was no control, it was absolutely free of charge. And that was rather terrible, really situation where to come out, more or less. Next slide. Yeah, as I said, that 97 negotiations started, and 2001, and during this, namely the period of our negotiations, there was adopted the EU Landfill Directive 99, and Estonia transposed this Landfill Directive 2001, more or less at the time when we really finished the negotiations. And that was rather, I would say, even a breaking point of this old style or old model in the waste management. And principally, here is a picture how it showed even a couple of years later, where Tallinn, the biggest landfill, municipal waste landfill in Estonia, the ditch around the landfill looked. This is more or less the leached water with any kind of litter. Pretty nasty picture was it indeed. But speaking about this 2001, when this landfill regulation was issued in Estonia, transposing the landfill directive, there was for the all existing landfills were a couple of very simple rules or requirements. And principally up to the end of the 2001, that means rather relatively short time, half a year, was required that every such a small landfill will install a waste bridge, have to install the fence around, and should guarantee the working hours control. That means that somebody worker there controlling what is bought and so on. And the regulation didn't say anything particular when this or this landfill should be closed, but just giving the option that whether you will make those investments, owners of the landfills, or it should be closed. And principally already during this 2001, more than half or quite a big number of the small landfills just in itself made the decision that, okay, we will close this landfill, we will not invest into this landfill anymore. So that was rather, let's say, good approach, I think so. Not directly forcing, but just putting some simple demands. Next slide. Well, and then 1991, that is about packages, came already the first Packaging Act. Just to remind that 94 there was issued EU Packaging Directive. Although this act, if you look now, it was perhaps a little bit simple and didn't emphasize yet very clearly this extended producer responsibility and so on, but some basics already were there. And 1996 the support, so to say, to the Packaging Act itself was packaging excise duty. We could call it simply also packaging tax. But the idea there is, I think in many countries, it's the same approach, although in different names might be, that there are defined the recycling and recovery targets. And now, let's say on the level of the single companies, or whether it goes through the, and mostly it goes through the packaging organizations, there are then summarized targets. And if the targets are fulfilled, then there is no tax. But if there is under achievement of the targets, then the gap between the target and the achieved level will be taxed. And the tax is, in this case, let's say much higher. In our case, it is approximately 4 times higher than would be the average price to be paid for the waste management sector to achieve the target, so to say. And this has been definitely very, very important economic measure to motivate the packaging collection and recycling. Next slide. Well, and about institutional development, I would say in the 1990s, as Harri already also described, that we had from one side big number of the small municipalities, which was a problem. And although there was made also attempts to push through the administrative reform and reduce the number of the municipalities, that ended up finally only 2017. It took mostly 20 years. That was strange, but true. But on this very 90s, mostly in the beginning at least, most of the municipalities or the bigger municipalities, they had their own municipal waste management companies, and they started to privatize them. There was the full, 90s, there was a privatization. Everything state-owned, municipal-owned mostly was privatized, and also waste management. And it is later to say perhaps it was even privatized a little bit too much, but anyway, such a collection sector somewhere in the early 2000s already was more or less fully in the private hands. And later on, especially when was started to establish new regional landfills, then was one reason to bring the municipalities back to the waste management, because the rules of the financing didn't really definitely allow to give a big financial support to the private companies, but to the public companies. And so the first approach with the new landfills or waste management sector centers was namely that those were the municipal companies then established. Yeah, well, and as I said, that this 1999 came the directive of the landfills, landfill directive, and that changed the whole waste management basically. Next slide, please. Here is just our nothing but the development of the Waste Act. That first was 1992. That was very simple and very short in today's comparison. Then we had like intermediate law for the transposition period, which already transposed, let's say, most part of existing this time EU requirements. But for the 2004, it came force exactly on the same day when Estonia became a member state. There came to force the new Waste Act, Full Act, also Packaging Act principally separately. And this already then implemented all the newer directives which were issued there, for example, the 2000 end-of-life vehicles, 2002 waste electric electronic directive, and so on. So it means that this extended producer responsibility in more broader sense than only packages. Next slide. Well, and just shortly to describe that how the process went of this negotiations and preparations, and this is definitely a very serious issue in all countries which have had those negotiations, being a candidate country first. And clearly it starts from the very detailed homework that is absolutely required. And although that was for us, it was already 20 years ago, and the situation is very different if you look at which directives EU law existed this time and where it have developed today. the package is much more challenging, that's for sure. But the principle have remained, most likely at least. That means that there is going on the sieving by each directive. And that means that every candidate country have to make a special file what is really already implemented concerning this directive, what remains to be transposed in the sense of the legislation, but then it comes definitely to the implementation. And implementation means like basic two things. One is the institutions, whether there are already institutions clearly established and targeted, or not targeted, but really given power by legislation, who are responsible to do this or this or this. And the second thing is definitely also the investments, because the change of the waste management in any country, as it was in Estonia, definitely in Bosnia-Herzegovina also, that requires a huge amount of investments. And in a short time, it is not possible to cover those investments with a very basic idea what is in the waste management, that is the producer pays. In the long run, the producer pays have to cover the cost, but in a short run, during those changes, that's not possible. And usually, and I think that it will be a case also for Bosnia-Herzegovina, that the EU funds will be made available, and that will help a lot of. But regardless of that, there should be always local financial instruments which will support it, definitely. Next slide. And yeah, this is already about negotiations and implementation period. And in our case, in the 90s, we had pretty much of support, both, let's say, like a knowledge side and also investment side from the Denmark, because the Scandinavian countries here were very visible in the Baltic region, especially. As I said, that every directive requires very detailed analysis how to implement it, and definitely also on the if it means that the new landfills should be placed on waste management center, there is definitely needed also in that very sense to analyze that which waste streams right now we have and which waste streams we have to face after, let's say, 5 years, 10 years. That sort of analysis also or always needed, and this is why the waste management planning is a very useful tool. And the waste management planning, of course, is required by a directive in general way. It does not say that on which levels. It says that whether in national level or in regional level, this is up to every member state or candidate country to decide. In Estonia, that was done at the beginning, even on the 3 levels, to try to make on the national level, then on the county or regional level, and then on the municipal level. Later on, the county level is really left out, but still there is a national waste management plan, and also required that the municipalities will have to prepare their own plans. Next slide.
Peter, just to jump in and say that we are out of time. I see you have 20 slides more, but just to let you know that you should wrap up.
Yeah, and I will here bring up just one very important point Harry already referred to, and that this is nothing really to take very exactly the example. That is our case with our oil shale issue. But what I want to emphasize is that going to those negotiations, preparing to those negotiations, it's definitely clear to find out and to make clear what is the absolute priority for example, for the Bosnia-Herzegovina, and then to try to use definitely a rather limited space for exemptions. for those high priority areas. Because that was said also for Estonia, I mean, during those negotiations and before and so on, that this is definitely not a very useful approach if you would come up and to apply the exemptions for the, let's say, many requirements in EU, because the process itself is like considered that the candidate country have to demonstrate that they are already almost there, that they are able to implement the EU legislation in a big part, at least in the majority. And there, yes, indeed, there could be certain questions where certain extra conditions, usually it means that a certain prolongation, certain extra time is given. So that's very difficult. And if I just compare our southern neighbors, Latvia, Lithuania, other Eastern European countries, many of them applied the extra time for the implementation of the landfill directive, how long the old landfills could be used, and so on and so on. In our case, this is just to say that there was consideration that energy sector is the highest priority, and we have to cover the energy sector needs. And this extra exemptions were asked only for the energy sector. That means that all other terms, also in the landfill directive, were applied exactly as was given in the directive. All other in the extended producer responsibility were applied exactly as was required in the directive. And this is perhaps to say that this is a serious issue, and also for the Bosnia and Herzegovina would be very important to figure out which issues are the utmost importance, and let's say priorities, 1, 2, 3, not more, and others should somehow be taken, that we have to implement them as they are, and we have to work hard if needed. So this is perhaps from my side with this intervention right now. Yeah, this is just a picture how it looked, our oil shale power stations, landfills. And this is in this very time it was, but that's just the history already today, definitely, that it was like considered that this is not in line with the landfill directive to pump the ash to the landfill with water mixture. And there was like a consideration that should be ended 2009, but later on, although they did put really a lot of money into this, in research, there was not found any workable solution, and was agreed again with the European Commission that this pumping with water mixture, where water is finally considered as a transport carrier of the ash, and ash is itself not a liquid. That is, let's say, the more or less a consideration, interpretation of the directive. So nothing more that you have to also figure out what is your crucial issue for the economy, for the country as such. Yeah, and there is perhaps to say yet that beside of the let's say average municipal waste, there is those waste streams which are covered already by EU with the extended producer responsibility, waste electric, electronic, batteries, then all packaged material and so on. And there is need to develop the recycling industry also as much. And of course, this is not straightforward that everything should be recycled locally, which is obviously not even possible perhaps, but at least to find out that which companies could do something, and to try to find also the financial means how to support them. Well, we have only one glass recycling factory, but they are also limiting themselves to the transparent glass. That means glass to glass, back to the new jars and bottles. But then again, there is perhaps not a first preference, but anyway, that is recycling. Some companies are producing pavement stones, putting the glass cullets, fine glass cullets to the concrete, for example. So this is more or less simple or much simpler industrial process. There are not yet, but I know that there are coming, obviously, some producers who would like to produce the glass foam from the glass. So this is like insulation material, rather high quality material, and definitely not comparable in the sense of the investments needed. Then it would be remelting, total remelting to the new glass product. So it is to say that perhaps such a more simpler recycling methods could be watched and looked. And of course, if there is no big metallurgy installation, there's nothing to do, and that's usually not big because the metal is well traded. Paper might be partly the same if there is some neighboring countries to look how it cooperates. Plastic, again, it's a big problem, as Ari also covered, and the new targets on the plastic weights, they are going pretty high, pretty demanding. But that is perhaps the positive side, is that the plastic recycling could be done in rather let's say small or medium size enterprises also. It is not necessarily the very big plants needed only. So it means that this is how to ignite certain new initiatives, and the private sector, definitely in the private sector, usually what I mentioned. So this is in no country usually the state-owned or even municipally owned, although it could be something, of course, nothing wrong. But anyway, how to bring the private investments into the waste management, especially to the recycling. So this is an important issue. So I don't know, are we time over or just?
But yes, we are. But if there's something interesting regarding the landfill closure, and you can.
Yeah, well, just scroll further. And here is that what our experience is, that the new landfills that is very investment-rich objects. So this is first thing, and here is just our experience how we cover the old landfills. And in the beginning of the 90s, there was 300, then it was 200, and in the moment when the landfill directive was transposed, 150. So it reduced remarkably already during the 90s, and then rapidly after that. And of course, most of them, they were very small, 1-2 hectares, and mostly they were covered also in a, let's say, simplified manner, usually giving more or less little hill cobble shape, and then covered by 1 meter, 2 meter, perhaps the soil. That was very average. Of course, there were some cases where there was very clear that local groundwater is contaminated, and in some cases also the cover of the landfills was much more. Also, plastic layers were used in a couple of places, but big landfills were really covered very carefully and rather extensive way. So that was 1991. So the map of the country, very dotted. So next. And here we see, the closure, cost of the closure. That means that the big landfills, all it together was in the smaller landfills, it was really relatively cheap or not very expensive exercise anyway. And the financing method we used was the same, that the most or nearly all, let's say so, those municipal waste landfills were municipally owned. But municipalities didn't have money really for it, and so the closure of those was performed in a model that 10% usually, that changed a little bit, but average by the municipalities, and 90% there is a center of the environmental investments established, which really gets their money mostly from the environmental taxes, including landfill tax. And they are really the authority dividing or dealing with the EU supports on that fields, both of, and means that those Estonian own resources also were divided to those projects plus European. So it was in big part anyway, this closure project was supported by state, and the most part of the closure of the landfills, those municipal landfills, was 30+ millions per 1.3 million people, if to calculate some close to 33 euros per inhabitant. So just to compare that, what would be the comparable number perhaps. And well, with the industrial industrial landfills also considering then it was another 100 millions. That was much more expensive, definitely. And this is to emphasize all the time that not only municipal waste, not only municipal landfills, but also industrial and mining waste heaps and so on. So next. And this is just to say that although also in Estonia, there were many people who considered that the landfill directive or the implementation, this is just about the landfills, just to, let's close the old one, let's build the new ones, and that's done actually. But it's very much more complicated. It requires the rearrangement, the whole waste management system. And first thing what it requires is the collection system that should ensure that nearly 100% of the households and other generators of the municipal waste are covered with the collection. So this is absolutely first priority in these changes. And the another is definitely the need to offer, to develop and to offer the service of the waste stations. We call them waste stations. In the British English, they call them usually civic amenity sites or recycling yards. So they have many names, but the idea is the same. So let's move next. Yeah, and this is the same. I already said that the local waste stations, public amenity sites are absolutely needed. Because why? The clear explanation is that to avoid the wild dumping, to avoid the littering, you have to offer the alternative. And the people can't really take or put everything to the container, so this is not possible. And secondly, this is also needed for the recycling. You have to collect a certain types of the waste also for the recycling, and here are those civic amenity site recycling yards, very, very useful object. And this is a network. It takes time to develop them. We have in Estonia, I think, roughly 100 of waste stations today. So it means that in bigger cities, 4 or 5, at least several. And in most of the municipalities, one or in smaller municipalities, still they have one for a certain region, actually. And this is an issue in that very sense that this is also investment. The average waste station have been with the price tag, let's say, close to 200 to 300,000 euro. And yet it is also operational cost related. So usually something around 20 to 30,000 euro per year is also operational cost. And in both cases, there should be decided that where it comes. And the investment, again, in Estonia, big part from the state, but the operational cost, this is up to the municipalities. So next, if there is time, but if not, yeah, this is just a picture how the biggest municipal waste landfills near Tallinn looked after the closure. And there in the corner, in the right corner, you may see that this is today operating one of the Tallinn city civic amenity sites. So this area is in a way still in use. Next. And so this is exactly what I said, perhaps this about civic amenity sites and the need to join the households to the collection. And in 2001, that means that more or less yet in the middle of the negotiations, there was made a study and that showed that 79% of the households were joined to the system, means 21% of population was outside of collection system. Nobody knew where they did put their waste. And some years later, or 2012, it was considered 95. So it means that it's 100 is perhaps even not easily achievable. Although there are countries like Denmark where there is principally impossible to be outside. If there is property where there is a living rooms, that is already counted to the waste management system, and you are charged. Whether you are living there or not living, that's not the problem. So next, this is a new, the small map is showing where the new landfills are standing, and 5 of them, and perhaps that in the long run, this might be over investment. We don't need them perhaps too much, But if I compare again our southern neighbors, I think that they did invest more to the landfills, and also over investments took place in a bigger share. Although I agree that also in Estonia there was. And the one example that the picture is that also in, not in all, but in a couple, I think, new landfills, also EU funds were used. Other were also Estonian own financing resources. Next. And so this is just the industrial landfills. Next slide. That was one industrial landfill, rather difficult really to close because there was some thermal processes. Yes, next slide. Tar lakes, nasty heritage, so to say. Next slide. And so this is on industrial waste, hazardous waste, also landfill after the closure, covered with limestone, and some plantation were put there, and it looks much nicer today. Next slide. And so this is one of the industrial landfills, big ones, really big ones. You can see perhaps from the picture. Next slide. And so this is one oil shale ash landfill, which was recultivated so that on the top of it was the wind farm was established. So that was very good kind of solution that old landfills, which didn't have very big use of, now it produce energy. Next slide. So, but I think that the time is over, so I will stop here. Or
Yes, thank you. Hvala gospodinu Peteru. Prezentacija je bila vrlo detaljna. Ja bih sad predložila, obzirom da prema dnevnom redu imamo malu pauzu, da je skratimo na 5 minuta i da se vratimo u 10:15. Pitanja je mnogo, zaista bi nam bilo važno da završimo u predviđenom vremenu kako bi uspjeli odgovoriti na sva pitanja. Neka su slična pa ćemo ih grupisati po temama, tako da evo predlažem 5 minuta pauze do 10:15 i onda se vraćamo sa novom prezentacijom. Evo već je 10:15, nadam se da ste svi za svojim računarima i da možemo nastaviti, da su i naše kolege iz Estonije također tu. Naredna prezentacija se odnosi na transformaciju sistema upravljanja otpadom u Estoniji, koja u principu nam treba prenijeti iskustva o glavnim principima i izazovima u preokretu koji se je desio kad je u pitanju hijerarhija upravljanja otpadom i koja su to stečena iskustva kada je u pitanju odmak od odlaganja otpada ka konceptu cirkularne ekonomije. Mislim da će ovu prezentaciju, ona je u principu zajednička i dijeli se sa narednom koja se odnosi na faktore. Mislim da će započeti gospodin Peter, tako da evo ja dajem riječ kolegi Peteru da nastavi.
Yeah, thank you. Well, indeed, this is a big challenge, and this is something that obviously could never be 100% achieved, because the circular economy is a certain, let's say, ideal you have to move towards, but you will touch not finally, more or less. But anyway, exactly that waste management should lead to. And I would start here that it's extremely important to implement very coherent and let's say even strict waste regime. And waste regime comes from this let's say term is used in the EU terminology, and that means that everything concerning with the waste should be covered with waste permits. Now, that means that all actors working on the waste should be covered with the waste permits. And if somebody is giving to somebody waste, that also who will receive it should have waste permit until it is recycled and already classified as a non-waste. There could be made exemptions, they are needed, but I mean generally. And secondly, that means that everything that is done with the waste, every process should be really foreseen in the permits, starting from the definitely landfilling, but later on whether somebody is storaging waste, somebody is sorting, somebody is really treating it, somebody is recycling. That is all waste treatment. That's important. Second thing that I definitely would like to emphasize also is important to implement as in detail as possible the waste list, European waste list. I mean, generally everybody knows that that's like a simple thing, but there is a tendency that in many countries it is used in a very simple and perhaps oversimplified way. That means that a small number of the waste codes are used, and many other waste streams which actually occur, which are generated, they are put to whether municipal waste, whether I don't know, in construction demolition waste very often, and there is only one code used for the construction demolition waste instead of using steel and concrete or tiles and concrete and wood and whatever other material based. So this comes really from the waste collection. That means that the waste collection companies, whoever is offering this service, they have to be careful or intended really to this issue. Why it is needed? It is first of all to understand that what is actually collected and where it all goes. And it is very difficult to plan certain changes and new installations and so on if everything is put to the one pot, so to say, with a couple of small number of them of the codes. So just the Estonian example is that the European list contains 850 roughly, and we have in a waste report some 450 codes. So more or less, but also sometimes we have another problem that there are codes, but they're still described with wrong codes than with the very general codes and so on. And definitely the same goes for the R&T codes. That means that recovery, including recycling and disposal. And of course, if the recycling is not very developed, then more or less everything is the disposal codes. But especially as recycling and recovery will develop, and that should be developed, then which codes are used and what is exactly the recycling, what is other forms of recovery. This comes with much more important level as it is perhaps today, just to consider. So next slide, perhaps. And yeah, well, one is what I just here wanted to say is that I think it's very useful. It's not required exactly, but it's have been very useful in Estonia. We have done it roughly after 5-6 years. Is a general study on the composition of the mixed waste and also collected packaging waste. And that gives you insight that first, how the certain initiatives on the source separation have worked, how much it have affected. And secondly, definitely it gives the potential of the source separation, because what is not yet source separated, so this is usually in the mixed waste. And you can't really source separate more than there is paper or plastics or metal in the mixed municipal waste. Yet you have to, of course, it's understandable, but practically you can never sort out 100% of certain material. But anyway, it gives you the potential. And definitely the hierarchy of the waste management, which is from the beginning of the 90s part of the EU waste legislation. And Harry Moora already mentioned the circular economy, which is like a new concept. But if you look, then I think that in any essential part, it also includes the waste hierarchy. But now this is the first levels of the hierarchy, the prevention and of course reuse. No, those have just given totally new type of shine, perhaps. Yep, let's take the next one. And here is mentioned that the extended producer responsibility as a concept included in the EU legislation is definitely challenging from one side, but also very important to solve certain environmental problems. And that's of course perhaps interesting that somewhere in the early 2000s there was kind of very positive mood and expectation that there are gonna be much more waste streams, material streams covered with EPR, extended producer responsibility, on the EU level. But just after the 2006 battery directive, no new such directives have been issued. Of course, we can here say that this reduction of the certain plastic one-way plastic items, or this single-use plastic directive, also implements the extended producer responsibility to the very, let's say, narrow targeted area of the plastic products, including the cigarette filters, for example. But this is just example. But anyway, that means that why? And the answer is that the extended producer responsibility is not so simple as it seems first. It does indeed allow to organize the collection of those waste types so that the costs are targeted to the producers or to those who are putting the goods to the market. But yet, the extended producer responsibility is always very challenging also for the public sector, for the state. First of all, to the state or regional authorities. That means that you should have there the good registers. You should register both producers and the products. And this is the basis where you can really follow whether the producers are really doing what is required. And the second thing is that there are always so-called free riders who are not really participating. And this comes then, of course, the issue of the competition. Those who are not participating, they are getting the better position on the market. So state definitely has, or state authorities have one obligation to guarantee the equal conditions on the market, and then it comes that they have to follow those free riders. So this is, and then therefore I think that it's not so simple, yes, as it seems. But then again, the directives allow the member states to implement also itself extended producer responsibility beside the EU requirements. And many countries have done it. The France is a champion here. They have many waste streams. In Estonia, we have extended the list of the beyond the EU list. We have tires, and tires are in most of the European countries, except Germany and a couple of others, but under the extended producer responsibility. And we have yet the agricultural plastic. It's not a very big stream, but it was considered a problematic. And one of the problems we had then before was that it was not considered exactly the packaging when put to the market, but then it was started to collect and to show as recycled plastic packaging. So it was, let's say, really blurring the packaging recycling report. And well, one way to avoid it is to say that there are extra rules, and that works on the same. So next slide. And here we have the waste national waste management plans, and as I mentioned, that this requirement comes from the EU directive, and we have done them which are matching the EU financing period so far, at least. And in some other countries, this have been not considered the big issue, and those such plans have been made up to 10 years or something, like different periods anyway. And the first national waste management plan was perhaps important in that very sense that in the middle of this period, Estonia joined the EU. So that was mostly dealing with the landfill issue, where to build, how many to build, how to cover old ones, what it costs, how to finance, and so on, and such things. Not exactly, definitely, there were all other issues also, but that was sort of the first issue, big issue. The second waste management plan already dealt the issue that how to divert the waste away from the landfills. There was a big discussion and analyze, like where to how much MBT for the mixed municipal waste or incineration and so on, those comparisons. And the last one, which was now they are really working with a new one. There is actually right now is legally speaking a gap. There is no valid waste management plan, but this third plan was really trying to target towards the source separation and recycling. It is definitely not to say that only those issues, but something above of others, perhaps that way. And I think generally the waste management plan have not been kind of documented on a daily basis. Somebody would read and look and really as a handbook, but really showing the direction to all levels of the decision makers, also politicians, and it has been important, and I think that useful. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, here is economic instruments. As I said, that well, in Estonia we have from the 90s already the landfill tax, and definitely the landfill tax have been one of the most influential economic instruments. Although it was at the beginning, it was very low. Later on, there is a slide obviously about separately. Then we have this packaging tax or excise duty on the packaging that already shortly explained, that if the targets are not, only then if the targets are not achieved, then the producers have to pay. But anyway, these have been really very strong, convincing measure that they would work as much as possible with the collection and recycling. And there is no such a general tax on the waste incineration, although it has been also discussed. And also the economic instrument is considered generally the extended producer responsibility, which is implied on packaging, on end of life of vehicles, on WEEE and batteries. And then, as I mentioned, also the tires and agricultural plastic. Agricultural plastic is there on the picture also. Next slide. And what is really been the influence of the landfill tax? And since 2015, it have not changed. It have been 30 euro per ton. It's not particularly very high. There are definitely in Europe, there are much higher tax rates to see. But from other end, it was enough to enable the investment to the incinerator. And it wasn't really absolutely a new build. There was a power station working with the natural gas. So it was like the waste incineration block was added there, and the connection to the heat network and the electricity grid all was already there. So it was enabling it. But anyway, the investment was more than 100 million euro in 2013, and this is actually, yes, this is a state-owned company, but it's a company, and they say that without the landfill tax, which was influencing the landfill gate fee, they were not been able to make this investment. And just making this investment means that there was no financial support directly to build it. They made their, let's say, financial plan, and they took credit from the bank, and they did build it. And as I said, that there was very, very important support role from the landfill tax to achieve it. And this time, the landfill gate fees price that has to be paid to landfill you delivered waste was something 50 to 60 euro. That means that without the waste landfill tax, it was something between 20 to 40. Nowadays already the landfill gate fees are something like 80 to 100 euro, and also the incinerator gate fees have gone up. And there have been even discussion to introduce the new tax for the incineration and to raise the landfill tax, but so far those have not been adopted. So that's just a discussion. So next slide. Yeah, as I said, that this landfill tax since 90s, and it was paid many years directly to the Center of the Environmental Investments, which also dealt with all EU funds available. So it was like two lines to apply. One was this Estonian own financial means, and other application type of line was for the EU supports. And namely, this landfill tax was a big important income source to cover those needs internally. Yeah, next. And this is just an example that looking also back to the, and only is to emphasize perhaps that there was a period, and that this is absolutely unavoidable, that when you may have both new landfills with the new engineered bottoms and leachate collection and so on, and all investments made, where understandably also the gate fee is much higher. And if somebody yet, on certain reasons, are keeping open the gates on the old landfill in some quarry, typically, where no investments have been made, of course, they could, if just left open, so to say, offer this service with a much lower price. In our case, that was leveled with, let's say, coefficient or factor that all non-compliant landfills, non-compliant means non-compliant with the landfill directive or landfill regulation requirements, then, and they still were permitted to operate, then they had just much higher landfill tax. So this is, and also here you can see that the oil shale waste, also every waste has landfill tax, although they have had a much lower level principally. Next slide. Yeah, and the income from the landfill tax, it have been roughly of course, today it is smaller because oil shale waste have been produced, generated and landfilled in a much smaller amount, but there was something like 15 million euro. That means something like 10 euros per inhabitant per country. And from that, roughly half, if was delivered back to the waste sector projects. Why not 100%? Because these environmental investment centers They also support all kinds of environmental projects on environmental awareness, on environmental education, on nature conservation, definitely. That means that there are a lot of areas where there is no direct income, but the cost part, of course, is there. And therefore, yeah, this is one of the ways how to cover those costs. Yeah, let's take next slide. And as I said, yes, that today already the price or the gate fee is 70 to 90 something euro. Every landfill in Estonia is a company and they can decide itself the gate fee. So this is not state controlled. And there are today, some of them are municipal companies or municipally owned companies, yeah, and some are private companies. But in all those cases, the companies are itself in position to decide what is the gate fee they receive the waste. And as I said, that this gate fee always includes this landfill tax, 30 euro per ton. But somewhere in the 2001, when the landfill regulation was established, then it was maximum 10 euro per ton. And there is clearly, again, to emphasize that the landfill gate fee is always the benchmark in the waste management sector, with which all other possible costs are compared. And if the landfill gate fee is kept relatively low, then it simply doesn't really allow to come and to invest to the alternatives to the disposal of the landfilling. Would it be MBT? Would it be incineration? Would it be definitely recycling? Therefore, and of course, also in Estonia, there was such a notion that but what about low-income people and there is a social problems and so on, and this is like a reason we have to keep landfill prices low. But I would say clearly that yes, indeed, those social questions or issues should be understood, and but the waste policy could not be. Is definitely not a good tool to address those social issues. There should be instead the social benefit system which would support those families or persons in need. And also in Estonia, we have had, and still I think even have, the social, well, you have your living room costs, and if your income is lower, below a certain level, then you can apply for the social benefits to support your or to cover your living room costs. And the living room costs as such, they definitely include electricity and heating, if this is central heating, something like this, but definitely also waste management costs. And waste management costs anyway from the total living related, housing related cost is very, very small amount. So that's not even significant, but put it that way, look the household housing and living room costs separately from the needs of the waste management. So this is perhaps to say. Next slide. Yeah, and this is just the packaging tax or the excise duty tax, as I said, and there is with the recycling and recovery targets. And we see here that the targets are given like differently or differentiated way for the usual or container collection and for the deposit system, because we have also the deposit system since 2005 for the PET bottles, metal cans, and glass bottles for the beer and beverages. And here is the principle is the same, but I already perhaps mentioned that there are targets, and if the targets are not met, then the tax should be made for the gap remained. Next slide. So now about the municipal waste. Definitely one is who shall or could decide where it goes, how it is collected. And here is in Estonia, the approach is that this is obligation of the municipalities. Municipalities are obliged to organize a tender. and the different companies, mostly private companies, who could, and they participate on the tenders, and then the winner of the tender is contracted, and for the 3 years or up to 5 years period, this company is really given a special right to collect the waste. And although the municipalities are not very often using it, but of course they have a power also to decide where exactly the waste is delivered. The collection goes on the three levels, so to say. Also, one is definitely the basic is on the property, or it is called also in English the door-to-door. But on the property. And what is perhaps to emphasize, and I think that might be difficult for the country like Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the background is a little bit different, but still I think that to consider that there are practically in Estonia no public containers for the mixed municipal waste. So this is mixed municipal waste is always the responsibility of the property owner. And of course, understandably, this is not a big problem if we have private houses or one family houses, let's say. But this is a big problem if we have multi-storage houses, dwellings in the towns and cities. But at least, yes, in Estonia, as I said, that every dwelling house is considered like a separate legal entity. There are partnerships of the flat owners, or if it is, might be today in some cases that there is a property owner who is just renting them out, and this is targeted is just this owner company perhaps of such a dwelling house. Anyway, the property owner is obliged to install the containers. This is not even an obligation of the municipality, and municipality is setting the rules which houses have to have containers. And mixed municipal waste, so this is absolutely understandable, there is nothing to say, but our approach has been that for example the Tallinn City's council regulations said already that 2003 there should be paper and cardboard container at more or less every dwelling house, and since 2007 there should be a bio-waste container at every dwelling house with more than 10 flats. So this has been the approach also how to emphasize or how to develop this source separation. Why I'm really considering this important is that if the mixed municipal waste containers are, let's say, in the public room and they are not really linked to any particular property, that makes, I think, rather difficult to implement the source separation, because if the people have the simple option to just to deliver the mixed waste to the container somewhere in the streets, how to motivate them really to sort. So this is just to consider. I'm not saying that it could not be, but on my opinion, it could be much more difficult. Second level is what do we have is so-called public containers. And those are so far mostly packaging containers, and today also containers for the clothing, textile waste or reusable items, perhaps not even yet the waste, plus in some municipalities also for the paper and cardboard. And the third layer is this recycling stations or public amenity sites, or how to call them. They're not so close often, because in the countryside it could be up to 10-15 kilometers in the local center, somewhere in a small town usually. So it means that this is a place where not every family, every person goes every day, perhaps not even every week. But many people definitely visit it weekly or once a month or something like this. But as I already mentioned before, this network of the public amenity sites is extremely important to develop the source separation and to support waste management to other ways. Next slide. And our approach to develop the source separation, again, not the only way to do it, but that our specific way that how the state government have communicated with the municipalities, and the municipalities have not been perhaps always very active to act in that field. There is regulation from Minister of the Environment, which is really describing in a rather detailed way which waste streams or material streams the municipalities have to organize source separation for which. That doesn't mean this ordinance at least does not say that which exact waste types should be collected on the property, which on the public room somewhere on the streets, and which on the waste stations. So it is left to the municipalities to decide. And of course, here is also that there is a certain list which is like a compulsory list, mandatory list, and some there mentioned are like voluntary. And at the beginning in the 2007, the park waste from the bio waste was obligatory to organize the collection, and the kitchen waste was not. And later it was amended 2015, and also the kitchen waste separate collection is made obligatory to the municipalities. Next slide. And how the prices or the fees are set is, as I said, that this is a tender, and on the tender today, the service providers are offering the price, and usually in most of the municipalities today, it goes even, that might be different really from the many countries. The fees are not even go through the municipalities. That means that most of the households, they pay directly to the waste service provider. And that have been debated and still debated, that and I see also, I really support that there is definitely more benefits in a model where the fees are collected by a municipality. And to say simply why, there are a couple of things. One thing is that some people who are not paying the fees, so this is often not always only, but often the people with social problems, kind of. And this is always easier if the municipality is dealing with these people instead of the private company. And the second thing is that this is for the future, is that if we want to have rapid developments in the source separation, and that definitely means also some differentiation of the service prices. And there, if all the service fees go through the municipality, then the municipalities have much better options to differentiate those fees by local conditions, and to make exemptions if needed, and whatever, actually, to be flexible. The private companies usually on those issues are not necessarily flexible, or vice versa could be also that they're putting a very high price to the mixed waste, so that it could cause other problems wherever the mixed waste then is delivered. But this is the situation in our case, yes, that everything by a tender and then fixed prices then. Next slide. So this is the public containers that we see. As I said, that mostly for the packaging and the clothing. And of course, the other picture shows that I think that this is also in your country. In winter period, sometimes it is problematic. So somebody have to take also this issue into account, that how to assure that the waste could be collected around the year. But let's take next slide here. So now the municipal waste, and obviously about the treatment. Yeah. And of course, the one big issue is that the waste are easier. This has been the tradition to just to deliver to the landfill, and now the question is that this is in long run not acceptable. That Harry Moore already referred that there is currently, of course, this is not yet very soon, but 2020. 35, there is expected that not more than 10 years. Of course, there is said that there could be agreed special terms to some countries where the initial level have been very high. So that is not exactly that, even if Bosnia would join, that this 10% 60% would imply, but anyway, this is a certain target, so to say. And to reduce, and even without that, what is important to emphasize, and this is basic requirement in the 99 landfill directive, this is reduction of the biodegradable waste. There, of course, was referred to as a benchmark of the level of the landfilling in 1995, so it's very old time already, but anyway, there is a gradual reduction is required. And so that means that whether to do it through the source separation of the bio-waste out, so that is definitely preferable. But there are other options to reduce both bio-waste and general landfilling. And then we will come to the issue of the after treatment of the mixed municipal waste. And there are two options, MBT and incineration. And in our case, the incineration in 2002 waste management plan was discussed, evaluated, but considered too expensive, because the evaluation was, and I think that's still, of course, correct, is roughly 50 million euro per 100,000 ton per year capacity. So it means that we have 200 plus tons facility incinerator, and the cost was 100 million. And but that was, as I already just explained, and just referring back to it, that the landfill tax raise was perhaps this key that allowed to do those investments even without the special investment support. Even that means that to say that we should not always really be so much in today's type of situation, but there should be definitely hope, and that after 5 years, after 10 years, there is absolutely, not absolutely, but quite different situation. Let's next slide. And this is just a comparison that was brought in Estonia, and might be not correct for your country, but the oil shale we already mentioned here. And that is funny thing that such an average mixed municipal waste, they have averagely equal calorific value. And if we many years, of course, we landfill something 300, 400,000 ton of mixed municipal waste, so that was quite a lot of energy, of course. But that is also true, and this is pretty often asked, that if in most cases any power station or whatever energy producer, they are paying for the fuel, so fuel has also positive price. Then for the waste, this is vice versa. Waste has a negative price, and then many people don't understand why. But the explanation, or the basic explanation, is that when it comes to the waste incineration, producing energy out of waste, this is much more incentive investments needing process, and those investments should be covered also, and that makes not possible really. Although there are in some countries, also in Denmark, I think they say that it could be done with a relatively low price, but in most countries in Europe, I mean, incineration prices are something like starting from 60 euro per ton perhaps. In our country, when the incineration started 2013, then the initial gate fee was something around 30 euro per ton. There was no tax, as I said. Next slide. And this is just a picture from the incineration. Yeah, it is serious industrial installation. That's for sure. But what is positive of it is that you get rid from the bio waste. There is no leachate issue, and as such in the landfills there is no landfill gas issue on the landfills after that, actually, and so on. And yeah, next slide. Let's take next slide. And one is what is in some countries at least concerns about air emissions. And here is just to say that yes, indeed, if the rules are not followed, set for the waste incineration, then it's rather harmful, could be. But the rules are very strict. And indeed, if the rules are fulfilled or followed, then the waste incineration is not really harming environment in no way. In Sweden, I have been in one of the new installations where it was owned by a municipality, and of course they monitored the exhaust gases on the pipe or the chimney of the waste incineration, and they also monitor the air quality on the streets. And they said that on the rush hour, the air quality on the streets was worse than the exhaust gases really going to the atmosphere from the waste incineration. So this is just a comparison. Next slide. And of course, when it is the waste incineration, you have to face just new waste types. You're going to have two types of ashes, so-called fly ash, and you have a bottom ash. Next slide. And that is perhaps positive side. It's not that big, but anyway, something like 3 to 4% from the input material is possible to take out as metals. And of course, those metals are going to the recycling then, and they're counted also towards the municipal waste recycling. So there is a tiny, not very essential, but tiny support to the recycling also from the. And this is in line with the EU rules today, because there is another kind of discussion being that whether if this bottom ash or something, bottom ash first of all, perhaps could be theoretically at least put to the concrete and considered as construction materials, hence recycled material. So this is today not accepted on those calculations at least, but metals are. So next slide. And the bottom ash is after the treatment, so-called aging and removing metals and so on and so on. So in our case, this is used in landscaping of the landfill, the big landfill, the new landfill actually near the Thailand. So they are itself using that material. And this is considered recovery. And therefore, as a landfill tax is only for the disposal, for this use of the bottom ash, there is no landfill tax so far. Next slide. Well, as I said, that this is the MBT, the mechanical biological treatment is from the investment point of view. This is definitely a simpler option, clearly. But what is the other side is that what is the aim of the MBT usually is that you separate the high calorific part, the plastic, perhaps textiles, rubber, such materials, and it has really sense if you have receiver for this particular materials. This is typically called RDF, refuse derived fuel. And in most of countries where this is produced, the cement industry is the receiver. So it means that this MBT mostly requires really very good cooperation with the cement industry. But to produce the RDF without really knowing where to put it is really questionable. And second part of it is that in such a simplified way, actually you crush and sieve, you get this fine fraction. Fine fraction is bio waste contained in the mixed municipal waste is usually glass cullets. There are some plastics in, there's some hazardous waste contained in the mixed municipal waste in, so it's a mixture. And this is rather difficult waste stream because usually it needs aerobic treatment to put to the landfill. In some modes, also in Estonia, by the way, it have been used also for the cover of the landfills. In some, and in our case and in Northern Europe, there have been definitely not accepted the proposal that it could be used in a more wider way in some wider landscaping in the construction of roads or whatever, actually the roadsides. But in some other countries in Southern Europe, in Greece, I think so, in Portugal, they have on a national level, they have accepted that this material is used in, as I just said. But what is also clear that with the new directive amendments in 2018, even if you would take this MBT fine fraction, which contains the bio waste also in big part, definitely, and you could say that this is something like low quality compost and you could use it in landscaping, for example, then this could not be counted towards the recycling of the municipal waste. And this is said because in some countries, this have been counted towards the targets of the municipal waste recycling so far. So this is for the future. So this is just to describe that, yes, it is cheaper, but there are certain problems associated, definitely. Next slide. And so this was very simple, really. You can't go simpler even, I would say. On MBT in Estonia, it worked some years, doesn't work anymore, but it was like open row. There was crushed, and just the scheme or the picture on the top there, it shows that there was used such a very from the Germany system of the pipes or metal type of products which allowed to aerate it without any artificial aeration, and that means that the bio waste contained there really degraded in big part, and also the moisture really evaporated. So it was like a rather dry material, and it was easier to sieve later to separate these plastics actually. Next slide. And yeah, that was now in couple of cases we have those MBT or those RDF producing facilities today, but they face this problem that our only cement factory was closed, and there is practically nowhere to deliver it. So that's the problem. And usually, if they are really this MBT type of sort, is that you can get out 40 to 50% RDF from the input material of this mixed municipal waste, and something 40% perhaps. Then it comes this fine fraction that I already explained what it is and what the problems are, and then usually there is some through the moisture. This is evaporating, and you will get the weight loss some 10 to 20%. So that's the conclusion or summary. Next slide. And yeah, this is about the cement facility, that RDF means good cooperation with the cement industry. That's absolutely clear. Next slide. And now to say that whether one is clearly better than another, or could only one of them be implemented, that first, yeah, well, without no problem, could be implemented on the same time in all country, no big problem. Also, even in a small country like Estonia, we have had them both, and this is not a problem. Incineration, definitely incinerator, so to say. So this is, I said, a big investment. So there is a big issue that who could be capable making those investments. And second thing is definitely the heating energy. The incinerator has this problem that if you don't have the central heating system, which could really take this heat, then economically it would be very, very difficult, even perhaps possible to install it. So that's for sure. But to compare and to say that one is better on the sense of the recycling, that one of those will give more for the recycling, there is no reason. Both can separate metals usually, and in both cases metals could be calculated towards the recycling, but that's more almost all. As I said, that this fine fraction from the MBT, at least after a couple of years, could not be any more calculated towards the recycling targets. Next slide. Yeah, this is, I think so, what I also said, that, yeah, there's certain discussion have been, but this is today not very practical anymore, that if the RDF goes to the cement factory, there is usually some mineral part in, and this mineral part comes a part of the cement, and the discussions have been that whether this could also be calculated towards the recycling. But I think that the latest interpretation on this field from European Commission say that no, we want to keep this simple and not even. Yep, and let's take next slide. Let's go further. We have
Peter, just to let you know, we are way out of time.
Yeah, therefore I'm just showing here that our case was that how the landfilling came down from 85 to even up to the 10%. So it is okay. It was, let's say, 13 years, 15 years, but just to show that it is really possible, although in 2002 waste management plan that was considered like a little bit too expensive, not possible, and so on and so on. So I would like just to bring this example as to encourage that the things are sometimes going faster than you can really expect, and don't lose faith in this. It is possible to get out from the landfilling system. And well, this is just right now here. I stop it then because the time is over. Thank you.
Hvala gospodinu Peteru. Mislim da je njegova prezentacija jako zanimljiva i iako nije stigao do kraja, vama je u chat prozoru postavljen link gdje možete skinuti prezentacije. Također, dosta je bilo pitanja vezano za neke stvari koje se nalaze u ovoj prezentaciji, tako da ćemo i kroz sesiju diskusije odgovoriti na neka pitanja, posebno recimo koja se tiču depozitnog sistema. Sada bih zamolila gospodina Harija, ukoliko će on nastaviti sa ovom posljednjom prezentacijom. Znam da on ima samo 3 slajda, pa možda radije kroz neku diskusiju ili ako želi zajedno sa prezentacijom da ovu neku završnu, da tako kažem, riječ kada je u pitanju danas prezentirani materijal.
So as I understand, I have a chance to wrap up our presentations, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, all I would like to add, I already recognize that there are some questions concerning the incineration, because I understand that there is also plan to build maybe or invest into the municipal waste incineration, and from that point of view, the figures Peter showed in the last slide are very, very good. You know, actually, this is mainly thanks to the incineration plant that the landfilling dropped below 10%. And there's definitely, although Peter was politically maybe correct, not wanting to say what is better, the other one or the other one, especially when it comes to incineration and MBT. But I would say, especially in bigger cities such as Sarajevo or something like that, where you have really a very wide or very, let's say, the central heating system is there. So that then definitely when attaching the incinerator to already existing power plant, the costs of investments are low, and economically, most probably, this is also quite reasonable investment. And this is definitely an approach which allows you to cut down the landfilling. But there has been lots of discussion also in Estonia, you know, whether the incineration has somehow been negative for recycling. Then the only thing that you have to really plan in the country is that not to invest or in, let's say, to build too much of capacity, either both in incineration and MBT. Plus, if you have also cheap landfilling, then if you have overcapacity, then there is no way that you can go for more recycling. So in Estonia, we had also a slight problem because these investments were made in parallel, as Peter said, by kind of private companies, although one of them is state-owned. Still, this was their own investment, I mean, incinerator and several MBT lines. And the capacity almost exceeded the amount of municipal waste what was produced at that time. Good thing is that the MBTs are now out of the business and they are basically not anymore functioning. And at the moment, the capacity for incineration is fine. So this is important that you really, on your regional and national level, you should really make a careful planning not to build too much of landfills, but also not too much capacity for incineration or MBT. So basically, you already know that you have to recycle minimum 50% of your municipal waste. That this means that you can't exceed the 50% capacity which is covered by landfills and incinerators and other means for mixed municipal waste. So don't overinvest, otherwise you will have a lock-in and it's very difficult to get out of that. But just very briefly to wrap up, there are a few slides at the end of Peter's presentation. They are basically just stressing what Peter has already said, that it's very important to set up the legal framework, first of all. If you go on, then you see the kind of scheme which tries to say, yes, this was the one. That the legal framework is important, and but it's not the only task you have to do. And I also a little bit see that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, your main kind of effort has gone into the transposition of the legal framework. As Peter already told, and it's clear, legal part to take over the EU waste legislation, it's very easy exercise. It becomes much more difficult when it comes to the implementation. So therefore, you should, in addition to development of legal framework, very clearly define the roles and responsibilities. And here I would say the key role is when it comes to municipal waste on municipalities. And as you heard, in Estonia, we made slight mistake by not putting too much efforts on municipalities and really too much going for privatization. There has to be an optimum. Of course, private sector has to be there, but the key role has to remain and responsibility has to remain on municipalities. And of course, the other part which is very important, this is adequate financing mechanism. It's very, very important. Without really designing a system on how to finance the system, starting from taxes. And here I would say the Estonian positive example is this landfill tax. I would really recommend to think on that, on your case also. Gradually increasing landfill tax has to be there if you want to achieve very quick changes. And this is also the source for new investments into the recycling and other more modern waste management infrastructure development. So this is important. And then also taxes for packaging. I would say this is important together with EPR system, which means that the other very important role is covered by the producer. So, and what Peter also tried to say, maybe not so clearly, try to establish the extended producer system in a way or pack it with legislation so that it is not really, let's say, occupied or taken by waste management companies again. So it has to be under the control of producers. So you have to develop the system in a way that producers really take the responsibility, that they control the system, the organization itself, and that they have a motivation to organize and set up a transparent system. And I would say Estonian experience also shows that the deposit system is something you should also consider, because this is extremely efficient transparent system to really achieve certain targets which are already there. Without the deposit system, it's impossible. But when it comes to the deposit system, it's extremely important that this EPR organization is again under the control of producers, not some sort of system which is kind of useful tool for some businesses or waste management companies who knows who. This is the main thing I would like to stress here. Of course, the third pillar is this public awareness part, which is the basis anyway. But I would say roles and responsibilities, adequate financing mechanism backed with strong legislation, and of course, awareness raising in parallel. This is the key, and this is something you have to really take into account when developing your system in your country. With this, I think I will close my mouth. We have only, I think, some minutes left for questions and answers, but let's take them as much as possible. We are ready to take more time if needed, but yeah, please.
Hvala. Ja ću nastaviti na našem jeziku. Zaista puno pitanja, skoro 30 pitanja imamo u našoj Q&A kućici. Neka od njih smo pokušali da grupišemo u nekih 9 tema, tako da ću ja postaviti sve ono što ne uspijemo odgovoriti. Evo, ja i Draženko smo se dogovorili da ćemo u pismenoj formi dostaviti kolegama da pokušaju odgovoriti na ta pitanja i naravno učiniti dostupnim odgovore svim učesnicima. Ja ću krenuti od depozitnog sistema. Mislim da je to bilo i među prvim pitanjima. Nekoliko naših učesnika je postavilo različita pitanja vezana za ovaj sistem koji je sigurno od interesa za BiH. Evo i vi ste spomenuli njegov značaj. Pitanje je bilo u kojoj mjeri je razvijen sistem pokrivenosti odvoza otpada prije uvođenja depozitnog sistema za ambalažu, znači koji je bio stepen pokrivenosti, za koji tip ambalaže je depozitni sistem bio najefikasniji u Estoniji, koji su prikupljeni procenti, a koji su bili troškovi same države u tom cijelom postupku. Koliko smatrate da je depozitni sistem uspješan, ukoliko recimo recikliraju Hrvatska 25%, Slovenija 55%, a nemaju depozitni sistem? I kaže još jedno pitanje, u Hrvatskoj je zastupljen depozitni sistem za dio ambalaže, a u velikim su minusima vezano za troškove. Evo, to je nekako sumirano, znači koliki je procent bio pokrivenosti sistemom prikupljanja otpada, koji je dio otpada bio najviše prikupljen na ovaj način, koliki su troškovi države i koliko je uopšte to uspješno u odnosu na zemlje u kojima nema uveden depozitni sistem, uzmeći primjer Hrvatske, koja ima, ali ima i velike troškove. Mislim da možda bi Hari mogao da odgovori na ovo pitanje, ili Peter.
I think we missed something. There were some questions, or what was them, because there were no translation.
Okay, so the questions were related to deposit system. What was the level of coverage at the time when the deposit system was introduced in terms of waste collection? What type of packaging waste was the mostly collected? What were the costs the country has related to establishment of deposit system? And what is your opinion how successful this system is comparing to the countries where there is no deposit system in place, especially having in mind that in Croatia, for example, the system is in place, but the country or the whole system has a big expenses. So it's in minus in terms of money.
This is the deposit system is maybe a separate issue which we can take as a kind of separate kind of workshop or something. But to be very short, both me and Peter, we were part of this development in the early stages in Estonia, and Estonia was one of the first companies outside of the Nordics, plus of course Germany, where there was this deposit system has been in the place already many years. So, but in Estonia, the success was that first of all, ministry very clearly introduced it as a mandatory part. Later on, Peter, you can a little bit add from your point of view. This was very important that the ministry decided that this is important. It is introduced on beverage and low alcoholic drinks, as Peter already said, covering plastic, glass, and metal, basically all the materials for this type of beverage containers, both one-way and reusable ones. It's very important, I would like to stress here, that without deposit system, it's almost impossible to keep the reusable bottles in the system. And in Estonia, in Latvia, Lithuania, neighboring countries were much more later. Now, Lithuania has introduced also deposit system, and Latvia is on the way. But just to compare Estonia, the share of refillable bottles is much higher than in Latvia, Lithuania. And this is thanks to the deposit system. Mm-hmm. And this investment was made by producers, mainly beverage and low alcohol producers, importers. There were no cost for the government at all. They made the investment, and if you keep it well managed and run and under the control of producers, because they make the investments, basically investments related to take-back machines and so on. If it's well managed, then Estonia, in a certain time, Peter, you can a little bit, correct me. It was 5 years ago. There were almost zero costs for producers. So if we compare the costs for producers, comparing the deposit system and container collection system, then the deposit system is cheaper for for producers. This is definitely a good argument to say that deposit system is expensive. This is totally wrong argument, which is usually a little bit like presented in a wrong way, especially this is the lobby of container collection system organizations. So it's not definitely more expensive, and especially when you take into account that deposit system allows to take back or collect approximately 90% of packaging put on the market. Can you imagine? 90%, almost, close to 100. At the same time, container system allows to collect back hardly, if we talk about plastics, then definitely below 50%. And even compared to these figures, even then I would say the costs are, at least in Estonian case, they are lower for producers. That's why producers are in a way today happy with this system. And of course, there were lots of lobbying against of that in the very beginning, but after that, when it was introduced and the real reality came out, and it turned out that it's cheap. And at the moment, producers are happy. So Peter, if you want to add something, then
yes, just some words. First, indeed that there was no investment from the side of the government. Practically all was invested from side of the producers, and the very initial investment was roughly 5 million euros. They made the counting center, so on, and this is important to emphasize. In many countries, the question is that what about those reverse vending machines, those collection machines installed? This is not required, even at least not on the standing phase. It is possible to do it manually, but of course with the machines this is better. In our case, those machines, RVMs called, they are invested by retail shops, but not only their own cost, because the deposit system is paying for them the handling cost, the take back cost, and principally this is covering the cost. So this is one side of the question. Was that what was the level of collection before the deposit? I think it was, so if to put it roughly, it was not higher than 30% of the PET bottles and metal cans. And with the deposit, it went very fast. With 1 year, approximately 80, and now it's close, no, 90, more or less. That means that was one of the arguments to really put it towards. It was that, as I said, that the law was adopted 2004 when we came to the European Union, and more or less a year later, the deposit system came to the force. And the argument was that we have to achieve the fast changes in the packaging collection, and that was one of the ways to do it. And the question was about Croatia, and of course I'm not exactly the expert, but a year ago in one seminar there was very good presentation from one Croatian expert, actually the professor of the university. And he explained the situation. I can just refer to him, that the problem in Croatia is that actually this is not exactly the extended producer responsibility in that very sense, that all the money goes through the state-owned fund. And to put it mildly, there are certain political interests to use those funds in other purposes, and that keeps the service fees for the producers higher than it would be in a exactly and rapidly producer produced model that is implemented in Estonia. And just to say what Harri also said, that indeed I think it was 3 years approximately when there was very good conditions also on the world market on the materials collected. That was that the prices of the materials were high. Then the Estonian deposit system was run with zero fees for the producers. Zero fees. Producers didn't pay anything. Of course, they had the cost on labeling and so on, but that's minor anyway. The service fees were zero. But this is exceptional. Nobody could really take that this is a kind of long-lasting situation, and neither is in Estonia today. There are fees they pay again, but even if to compare those fees they pay, I would say that in some materials, those are definitely cheaper than it would be in the container collection. And in some others, they're similar. I mean, and then on the class, it might be slightly higher, but the question is that they are also collecting it more effectively. They are collecting 90%.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Then I will continue in English. Ja ću na engleskom jer očigledno prijevod radi u jednom smjeru, da ne komplikujemo. I will continue in English asking you questions. The next one about recycling. What kind of waste streams are mostly recycled in Estonia? What about hazardous waste? Do you have recovery capacities or you export it? If yes, where? And is Estonia exporting waste? How is this integrated in the reporting and targets? So maybe Peter again.
Peter, I will take the first one and leave the second hazardous waste to you, because of course we both would like to answer. But in a way, when it comes to the source separation and the recycling, and if we talk about municipal waste, then as you already understood from the EU perspective, you know, at the moment, of course, it depends on municipalities, the bigger municipalities, and this is also based on this ordinance, what Peter mentioned, that the ministry has established, that there are certain list of mandatory waste streams that have to be collected. So in theory, basically all municipalities have to collect all these major waste streams, starting, of course, in addition to mixed municipal waste, waste paper, packaging, bio-waste, and then, of course, this is something which is usually collected door to door. It's in most of the municipalities, or at least in the process that the organized waste management collection or waste collection should cover. In addition to mixed waste, there has to be a container for waste paper, bio-waste, and more there is a tendency that but it's now more voluntary, that also next to the door, next to the houses, there is packaging container. But as Peter said, the packaging is usually collected via public containers. So this is the main set which is which is there in most of the municipalities, but still it has to be improved and especially enforced. What that we see at the moment, that not all municipalities would like to deal with that, so they try to do it as minimums as possible. And then there are different exemptions, or they have exempted, let's say, individual houses or some other houses. So it is still under the development, but this is the thumb of the rule, that in the future, in addition to mixed waste, paper waste, bio-waste next to the door, and packaging, this is the minimum part. And Peter, you can take this, the problem of hazardous waste, because Estonia is small, and this is maybe, I have also, as I understand, this is also a problem in Bosnia and Herzegovina, what to do with specific waste streams.
Yeah, but there was also a question concerning the recycling capacities. And I would say that this is also problematic for the smaller or medium even countries to recycle all of. And we do not have practically any metallurgical industry, so metals are 100%. Glass is, I mean, half to half. Half is recycled locally, half is exported. Paper also, some perhaps 20 is locally recycled, 80% is delivered to the other countries. Plastics are really very changing, and but I think that some less than half is recycled in Estonia. More is exported. Usually to the EU, of course, to the EU countries, neighboring countries here, more or less. And this is very changing, as you may know. That, of course, not so much, but anyway, until 2018, also from Estonia, something was delivered to the China, and China is not receiving anything anymore like this. So this is a problem, whether there are deliveries to the other Asian countries, and now in the EU it should be solved. So basically this is and the second question was about hazardous waste. And hazardous waste, indeed, this is a very mixture of different waste streams, starting, for example, the batteries and waste electronic. Those are also. And the batteries are not treated in Estonia except the lead acid batteries. We have a facility, definitely. And they are bringing in pretty much of lead acid batteries from other countries, but other smaller batteries or whatever types of those are exported. We is treated partly in Estonia, partly exported to the other countries. Some recyclers in Estonia take the we from the other countries, so it's rather such a changing. But the more hazardous waste, which is perhaps the usual understanding, that means that some home chemicals and paints and solvents and whatever such stuff is collected. There are hazardous waste companies. This is a very well established for today private companies network, dealing, offering services and collection and everything. And then what is burnable is burned. There is one, as I said, that it was earlier, it was sent to the cement kiln also pretty much of. Today, this is a part of the problem, but still we have one private company in Tartu. They are incinerating some 2,000 tons, I think so. There is one very delicate hazardous waste type is medical waste coming from the hospitals containing the human tissues or something. So this is also, let's say, incinerated in this special incinerator. And if something needs to be finally landfilled, then there is also specially designated hazardous waste landfill. There is treatment options, the physical chemical treatment, that needs to be solidified to the firm type of concrete-like. This is not exactly the concrete, but concrete-like model, and then it will be landfill. But if needed, and that happens definitely, then is also exported to the other countries. In our case, it's usually Finland, Sweden, Germany, perhaps such countries.
Maybe just to add, Peter, but in the very beginning, states still invested into the first capacity for hazardous waste treatment. The first major investments were made by the state, and then later on they were rented to private companies, and now private companies are more and more investing themselves, right?
Yeah.
This is more like
that's right. The very basic network was first established by a state. This is true, but later on it have been even privatized. Several of those collection centers. It's more like in private hands today. And this is what I said, that we are really using, if needed, the services provided by Finland, Sweden, Germany. So it have been all the time. For example, such a very, very serious issue on the, I don't know whether it have been so in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that is the old pesticides. Because as we regained our independence in 1991, we had also this collective farm system in Estonia, and every collective farm had some storages of the old pesticides. And in the end of 90s, it all was first mapped and registered and then cleaned up those sites. And there was roughly 600, 700 tons of old pesticides. And most of them were also finally sent to Finland and Germany, I think so, for the treatment incineration mostly. And some remained in Estonia, for example, the mercury-containing waste, because no incinerator, even the designated hazardous waste incinerator, they don't really accept anything that contains in a higher concentrations mercury. So that remained in Estonia, that was solidified and put to the specially designated hazardous waste landfill.
Thank you very much. We have more questions. Of course, we will extend a little bit of seminar for 10 minutes if everybody agrees. The next set of questions is regarded to cost of services. Basically, the question was, what is the price of landfilling now in Estonia? I think there was in one of your slides about up to 70 euros. Yep. Did you gradually increase this price, and how this impacted the price for the citizens collection and disposal of the citizens pay? How this impacted this tariff actually?
Yeah, very good question. Actually, as I also, indeed, it was in my slides that in 2001, it was not more than 10%. Then somewhere in the mid-2000s, 2010, then it was some 30, 40 euro, and now it is some 70 to 90 roughly. And the state have not really influenced those prices. The landfills itself have come to this. The influence to the service prices to the households, it have been, of course, but not very, I would say, essential, because there are other components, the cost component, definitely the transport, collection, and so on. But average, if to put it in average, I think that average is something around €5 per household per month. But in many cases, especially the families living in their own family houses, and they are sorting out usually the bio waste and composting in a garden, and if the people are sorting out the packages and delivering them to the packaging container, means that they have very few also mixed municipal waste. I think in many places the average monthly fee could be only €2-3 per month.
Okay, thank you very much.
Funny, just to amend, is that funny thing is that very often today also politicians in the parliament, even if there is discussion about why the development on the source separation and on the recycling, but Harry also covered out where is the problem and why, and pretty often is put the finger on that actually the fees the households pay for the mixed municipal waste, they're too low, that this service is so cheap that the people don't feel themselves motivated to change their behavior, to sort out more, actually. And therefore many people suggest that we have to do something to make, namely, not the waste management as total, but namely the mixed municipal waste more expensive.
Yeah, this is maybe a little bit the political issue, because as the Estonian experience shows, and as Peter mentioned, I would say if you live in a big house with many flats, then the average fee per flat is something, I would say not more than €2 per month, which is basically 1 cup of coffee, you know. And but at the same time, this is very heated discussion on local level, especially before elections or something like that. Somehow people tend to take this as a very significant sum. And there's a lots of discussion, debate, and politicians are afraid to increase this fee. And this is one of the reasons why our municipal waste management system is in a way stuck, because nobody is willing to increase this fee, although it's very low. And we have made several examples by showing that the total communal cost for one household could be several €100, including energy, heating, and everything. So the waste part of this communal cost is below 5%. So it's ridiculously low compared to the other communal costs. And but at the same time, on the political level, it's always an issue. Always local politicians tend to bring it up as a problem, so to say. But I would say that this is not really very high at the moment. That has to be increased definitely in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. The next set of questions is related to landfill closure. The question was how much time and money you needed to close all unsanitary or uncontrolled municipal landfill, and did you actually close all of them in Estonia? Does the landfills that are closed have already have secured financial guarantees and supervision for the next 30 years? And how did you actually prevent the people to create dumping sites in situation when you started applying this landfilling tax? And whether there were some negative feeling from the municipal side when this landfill tax and closure of municipal landfill was taking place. So these are a couple of questions related to the closure, and if you can, just shortly answer them, please, because we have to wrap up in a couple of minutes.
Well,
I leave it for Peter then, because he's very short, I know.
Actually, the period was obviously some 15 years or even more when we started. We started in the end of the 90s yet, and it went up to 2015 when all those old landfills were closed and covered. now about this financial guarantee, of course, on all those old landfills which worked once and didn't collect anything for the future aftercare fund, there was no such thing. And if they are closed, then there are set by environmental administration certain rules for the monitoring, for example. But those costs are then to the municipality who really was the owner of the landfill. So this is the basic approach. Of course, in the new landfills and now operating currently, they all are obliged to collect certain funds separately for the final closure and aftercare until 30 years. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will last 30 years, but up to 30 years if the monitoring shows that it is necessary. So this is different. Now the question, and that is very, very justified, that was exactly a lot of opinions on level of the average citizens, on the level of the local politicians, that it is not a very wise option at all to close the old landfills and so on and so on. And in my slides, I will just refer to them, that from the very beginning, the basic approach was that all households, as much as possible, at least, should be joined to the compulsory waste collection system. That the model that was really practiced before, that especially in the countryside, but even in the small towns and so on, and especially the people living in the one-family houses, that they just deliver their waste itself to the local dumping site. So this is not anymore acceptable. And many of them say that we don't need here the waste collection service. We do not even generate the waste, actually. So this is just a fairy tale and should not be taken seriously. And there is a rule that all households where the people are living, there should stand a waste container which is emptied, let's say, once per month. And the owner of the property or the house has to pay this bill. Would it be €2 or €3, whatever, actually. So this is to make clear for the people that this is a service, and this is, if somebody would like or does not like, this is compulsory service, and you are expected to put the waste into the container, and even if you are not doing, you are still charged. So this is the basic approach to make clear that no, you are generating the waste, everybody is generating the waste, and we collect it. And as a society, as a municipality, as a state, we do not accept that you are dealing with your waste itself, because in most cases this is not in line with the requirements of the law. So but the landfill tax influence in that very sense, it haven't really influenced the prices, the service prices that the average families pay so rapidly. So practically there's no reason to say that there was like a clear type of behavior or change in the people, that now you raise the landfill tax, now we're gonna not more pay, and I'm gonna really deliver the waste to the pushes, actually. Well, that is perhaps the summary.
Okay.
Yeah, just few clarifications. Yes, the key was that municipalities were forced to form a register of local property owners, and they automatically were then linked to the service system. So even in the very beginning, some of them, they said, no, we are not going to put any container out there because we don't care about this service. But then they started to get bills, and then they recognized that there's no sense. And they, of course, in the very beginning took them to the courts and lots of hassle. But then they understood that it's easier to pay the bill and put the container. And then it took away the motivation to take this waste into the, littering somewhere just to dump it somewhere. This was the key. And it took some years to introduce it. But after that, it started to work, at least the minimum one container for mixed municipal waste. Then this pressure for littering and dumping was taken away.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of questions regarding the incineration, especially because Canton Sarajevo is examining the possibility of procuring the cogeneration plant. Maybe I will just ask two questions, and then I will finalize this Q&A session and ask you to, if possible, to provide answers in written for the rest of the questions. And Draženko is also having something to ask and to wrap up. So regarding the incineration, the question was, what were recycling and landfilling rates in Estonia before introduction of incineration, and how these rates changed to date. I think these answers are on the slides, but if you can just in short. And since EU for recycling is expecting the stricter targets, what is the future of incineration in Estonia? What are the perspectives? And if you are in position to decide on incineration today, having in mind the EU Green Deal and other legal, European policies, would you still take the same course? What are the biggest challenges with incineration? The administrative part or financial, logistical, and social? Someone is asking also about the treatment per ton, price per ton. I think there is also in the slides. So if you can just briefly, what is the future in the perspective of future of incineration in the perspective of EU, and what are the challenges?
I will take very quickly first, and Peter could maybe add few words. As Peter showed in his slide, after the incinerator was introduced, the landfilling dropped in 2 years from 70% below 10%. This is already something just to understand what was the influence of the incineration. And compared to that, we were very successful regarding the landfill the targets. When it comes to the next steps, then as I already said, there was a slight fear that we have too much of capacity when it comes to incineration plus MBT. But as already Peter mentioned, MBT is out of the business because of economic cost, simply operational cost, and there is no place to take this RDF. So basically they are in a way out, and at the moment the capacity of incineration fits very well to the big picture, because they can't incinerate more than 50% of municipal waste. So the other 50% has to be recycled. But from the, let's say, 10-year perspective, I think they have counted easily. There will be no major changes. And if we look on what other more developed countries they do, like Sweden or other countries, they still keep the incineration. And it is clear that there is still need for incineration, because incineration has an alternative, very strong alternative for landfilling. But again, it can't be increased. So there will be no additional investments, and most probably EU doesn't accept any public, let's say, support money which will go to the waste to heat, or let's say incinerators. So EU doesn't like this anymore. So most probably this will be limited.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add, there was, I saw also like comment that the European Environmental Bureau, I think so, have commented that this is not environmental and so on. And there are definitely different political opinions, but I would refer, the European Commission issued a year or two their communication concerning especially the waste incineration. And the idea in this communication was that the waste incineration is fully in line with the EU waste policy, but the question is how much. And in many cases, indeed, the European Commission have even criticized the countries that are incinerating too much. That means that there was, I think, in Harry's slides that there is today the target for 2035, 65% of the municipal waste should be recycled, 2/3. That means that still is absolutely acceptable. And I think that this comes close to the level where it's unavoidable already. 1/3 of the total municipal waste should be treated in some other way. You can't really, that is only a pink dream, somebody's dream that we're gonna reach, near 100% of recycling. It's simply not possible. And this 1/3 in long term is absolutely acceptable to incinerate. And even in some materials, for example, take a paper or take some plastics where this mechanical recycling could not really be held up too many rounds. It's a rather limited number, and therefore it's absolutely unavoidable even that part of the low quality paper and low quality plastics are really removed from the circulation. And what you can do with them if you will really have to remove them to keep up the quality of the other stream. So therefore I'm not saying that the incineration is best thing in the world, but I really agree fully what the European Commission have said in this communication, that it's fully in line with the EU waste policy. and it is absolutely, without any doubts, preferable to the landfilling. So this is important to emphasize. Because very often it is, I really see that those who are opposing really incineration, they are not like agreeing that that means actually that you say that even if those wastes are going to the landfills, so this is more acceptable.
Thank you, Peter, very much. Ja ću se izviniti svim učesnicima što ostala pitanja ostadoše neodgovorena, ali u svakom slučaju, kao što sam rekla, zamolit ćemo naše stručnjake da daju pismene odgovore koji će biti dostupni i bit ćete obavješteni. Sada ću predati riječ Draženku koji je isto želio par pitanja i da zatvori današnji skup.
Prije samog zatvaranja radionice, moja dva pitanja, a koja su vezana sa današnjim naslovom webinara, kako su nadležni organi Estonije postupali u situacijama kada su prilikom transponovanja zakonodavstva EU u nacionalne propise uočili da privredna infrastruktura nije omogućila potpuno provođenje zahtjeva EU u praksi, odnosno primjer kod nas imamo već zakonodavstvo koje je transponovano, međutim u praksi još to nije zaživjelo. Na nivou ministarstva imamo zakone, imamo podzakonska akta, međutim opštine i gradovi koji su nadležni za organizaciju upravljanja sistemom otpada na svojim teritorijama to ne sprovode u praksi. To je jedno pitanje. I drugo pitanje, kad ste spomenuli cijena otpada prikupljanja, znači da li to cijena od 3 do 5 eura što ste rekli da domaćinstva plaćaju za prikupljanje otpada, da li je tu sve uračunato i prikupljanje, transport i deponovanje? Odnosno njegovo zbrinjavanje, da li to deponovanje, reciklaža, da li to obuhvata tu cijenu od 5 eura?
I hope did you hear the questions? Did you listen to the translation?
The translation system doesn't work very well because I think we have to have help.
Okay,
so
quickly, I'll
we have to rely on you.
Once you transpose the directives, what were the challenges? I mean, how did you overcome the challenge of, for example, lack of infrastructure? In case when you don't have infrastructure to respond to the requirements of the EU legislation, how did you overcome that? And for example, the communal enterprises, which are, even understaffed or have old equipment, etc., that they cannot respond to the challenges that are set in the directives. And the second question was about the price of services, which you said is 3 to 5 euros. Does this include collection, transport, and disposal? Yeah. Is it possible to cover the costs with such small prices?
Yeah. Just shortly about the infrastructure, very justified question. And in my slides also, I brought up and emphasized the importance of the waste management planning, and namely on the national level, and I think in your case also on the, let's say, federation subjects level, it is important to do really very detailed waste management planning. That is needed in which order actually were the priorities, and through this process to give also the costs actually related. And then, of course, who could be possible owner of the projects? For example, in the municipal waste, yes, indeed, those could be, or even should be, I think. So basically, the municipal structures. And now the next question is that how much are the municipalities or those structures itself to finance? How much could, let's say, the state level to support, and that could be the share of the European Union funds, for example. So this is the way how we have done and established the basic infrastructure. And now the next thing is that I would also emphasize is the role of the private companies. Perhaps we are example that from one side it have been very successful because the private companies have a very big role indeed in the, especially in the packaging collection and so on, but not only. And also even let's say municipal waste, pretty often it is given to the private companies that they are dealing it, and that means that in such a case, not all investments should necessarily be done by public authorities, but something could be easily be left to the if there are companies, of course, that means that there should be a certain legal environment to allow them to come to the market and to allow and so on. Perhaps this, but of course, I also consider that in the long run, it could be a very good idea to have at least a basic infrastructure on the municipal waste, on the public hands, to avoid over investments and struggle and so on, and control lower also. And that is a good concept, obviously, but that doesn't really necessarily mean that even the collection should necessarily be done by public companies, not to mention recycling. And recycling could be easily and even preferable. There would be a role of the private companies.
Just to add a few words, yes, Estonia is a good example, maybe not to really follow when it comes to too heavy privatization. As we several times already said, we municipalities gave away everything, and this is one of the reasons, since there is also competition, why this fee is relatively low when it comes to this type of municipal waste collection. But at the moment, this is also one of these obstacles, barriers, why the system is not anymore developing. If the private sector provides us a service, especially under the competition, then they keep the fees low, but they are not really willing to invest into the improvement. And we clearly see in Estonia that the private sector has, in a way, stopped the investments, and now again municipalities have to come in, especially when it comes to, let's say, bio-waste collection and recycling, because this is not economically profitable business. Let's say also there are several other streams like textiles and other problematic waste streams that have to be collected now and recycled. And there's you can clearly see that that private sector is not willing to do big investments anymore into that. So there is really a time to take, again, municipalities have to do this themselves, and that's why we will see that the cost for local residents will increase. But at the moment, I would say yes, in Estonia, this fee is relatively low. It is possible to do it if you do it efficiently. And then if you want to do it efficiently, in a way, in a certain amount, you have to involve private sector.
Mm-hmm. Mm. But perhaps I would add this also, that to emphasize the importance in the waste management context to find the links to the other sectors. And just one example, one of many, would be the bio-waste. Yes, indeed, it should be separately collected, that's for sure. Secondly, now you have two options, whether you compost it or whether you could really produce a biogas out of it. And the biogas production in many countries, I mean, in the Nordic countries, for example, is rather not yet in Estonia exactly that way, but I hope it goes that way. There are like a big or even medium, perhaps sometimes, agricultural companies who are really having cows or whatever, actually. And then they have often different problems with the manure. And one of the technical solutions to manage the odor and whatever problems related to this manure is to put it to the biogas. And we have in Estonia some 5-6 rather big installations really producing biogas in that way. And what is not yet in a place is to organize the pre-treatment of the source-separated waste and to send this such a pre-treated bio-waste to the biogas. And this is exactly the case what they are doing in the Nordic countries and Germany in many cases, actually. So why I'm emphasizing it is that this is typically nothing to do with the municipalities. This is a private companies, and this is clearly also the green energy. Because among of other many requirements the EU has, there are also requirements on the energy market. And I don't know really how it looks in Bosnia and Herzegovina right now, but it could be one of the way to develop the biogas production, and to this biogas production also to offer part of the solution for the bio-waste handling.
Thank you very much.
Evo na kraju današnje radionice da se zahvalim i također da se zahvalim i našim učesnicima. U jednom trenutku vidio sam da je bilo oko 140 učesnika koji su slušali vaša predavanja. Hari je na kraju svog predavanja sumirao, što kaže, stanje i iz toga se dobar dio može primijeniti na Bosnu i Hercegovinu. Ono što smo mi danas ovdje vidjeli, znači da moramo početi sa odvojenim sakupljanjem, sa razdvajanjem otpada na mjestu nastanka. Znači to je, kod nas je to maltene u pilot projekti postoje, osim što kaže kantona Sarajevo, u ostalim opštinama nije ni nivou pilot projekata. Također, da bi omogućili dalji razvoj sistema, jedan od zaključaka da bi moramo, znači osim deponija ponuditi i neku alternativu, neki novi vid zbrinjavanja otpada. I ovo što smo danas također primijetili, znači jedan od vidova napretka u ovog sistema u početku je uključivanje dijela privatnog sektora. Meni je i jako žao što sam primijetio, danas sam primijetio da je bilo dosta predstavnika iz nadležnih ministarstava i oni su bili aktivni kroz ova pitanja i trude se, što kažu, da poboljšanja neka uvedu, ali oni uvode ta poboljšanja, jednostavno donose zakone, ali sad nedostaje taj mehanizam kako dalje primijeniti. I žao mi je što nisam primijetio ili jako malo da ima predstavnika komunalnih preduzeća i opština, odnosno gradova, koji su na kraju ti koji implementiraju te zakone i koji trebaju da sprovedu u praksu. Nadam se da će u našem daljem radu, u razvoju ovog ESAP-a, ove vaše prezentacije će biti od pomoći kako nama koji organizujemo to, tako i svim ostalim učesnicima radnih grupa i nadamo se da ćemo u daljem radu imati ovih novih članova radnih grupa i da ćemo primijeniti ova vaša iskustva i preporuke koje ste u svojim prezentacijama danas ovdje podijelili sa nama. Još jednom se vama zahvaljujem i također svim ostalim učesnicima na današnjoj, ja mislim, jako korisnoj radionici.
I ja bih se zahvalila svima i evo, još jednom da vas pozdravim i pozovem da se priključite radu naše radne grupe. Posla je puno pred nama, a zahtjevi i izazovi su veliki, tako da svaka pomoć pod navodnicima je dobro došla da sagledamo pitanje upravljanja otpadom iz svih uglova. Tako da, evo, thank you our panelists and participants. Thank you for all the experiences that you shared today, and we hope that you will stay with us until the end of this process to guide us a little bit and provide a very useful insight in what the working groups will prepare and decide on the challenges and goals for the country. Thank you very much. Zahvaljujem se još jednom i do skorog viđenja.
Ja to.
Thank you.